Hello, I'm Anne, and I was adopted at the age of 13 because my parents were abusive, and I didn't realize it. You see, my parents were pretty weird. They would literally lock me up in our basement if I did something wrong. Basically, if I would break something, or go to bed too late, or even talk too loudly, they would send me to the basement, never really explaining what I did wrong. I would sit there in the darkness. The only light coming out was from a small window that I couldn't reach. When I was 6 or 8, I didn't really understand what was happening. The only thing I had when I was down there was my imagination. I even had an imaginary friend. I used to talk with him, but then my parents said I couldn't do that either. Yeah. As I got older, like around 12, I wasn't sent to the basement as often when I was a kid. Instead, my parents created a strike system. If I did 3 wrong things, then I would be sent to the basement. It was only then that I started to really see how my parents were talking to each other. Or, more accurately, weren't talking to each other. They were just sitting silently, never saying a word to each other. Even if they did, it was my mom who was shouting, and Dad who was ignoring her. They became more strict, too. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere after school, and I wasn't allowed to talk to boys. I had to sit in my room after school and be extremely quiet. They didn't really care about my life. If I had adequate grades, it was enough for them. I saw how other teenagers were at school. They were all talking to each other and laughing, and I couldn't because I was afraid of my parents. They forbade me to tell anyone anything about our family, saying that family matters should stay in the family. The only person I talked with was a boy named James. I tried to avoid him because I wasn't allowed to talk with boys, but he was persistent. He also came from a bad family, so we had something to talk about. He would tell me how horrible his life at home was, and I started to understand that mine wasn't any better. What was so crazy was that I didn't even understand that it was bad. When I was 13, my parents locked me up again, and I realized that I was tall enough to open that window. Because of James, I wanted to change something, and this was my small chance to do it. I crawled out of the window and just walked around the block. I was so happy that I found a way to avoid sitting in the dark basement. It was the best moment of my life back then. I was back by the time my punishment was supposed to end, and nobody noticed anything. So I started doing it regularly. Sometimes James would come over and we would walk together for an hour. His parents didn't care where he was. This continued for a month, but then James disappeared. I guess his parents moved away and I couldn't reach out to him because I had restricted access to social media. I continued to do it alone, but one day my parents caught me. I crawled back in and saw my father standing in the middle of the basement in the dark. I was so scared and I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He took me to my mother and they both told me to get out of their house. They said, "If you want to live like a homeless person, go and be homeless." I begged them not to throw me out, but they didn't listen to a word I said. I was in tears, and this was rare because I didn't cry much. I was just too accustomed to my life being like this. But what happened that day, it was a bit much, even for me. Now I realize that they just wanted to scare me and they weren't really throwing me out. But back then, it was scary, yeah. I didn't know where to go, so I went straight to school. It was the only other place I really knew, to be honest. It was nighttime, so I was trying to be as invisible as possible. School was closed at night, of course, so I had to wait the entire night there. I hid behind one bush and tried to sleep, but it didn't work. I was too worried and scared. I guess my parents didn't expect me to really go somewhere and not just wait for them to change their minds in the front yard. But I didn't have a phone, so they couldn't call. And they probably didn't even try. After a very long and cold night, our school security guard came to open the school. He noticed me lying in the bushes and walked over to me with a flashlight and asked angrily, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm sorry, please. I don't have anywhere else to go." He immediately took me to his office, gave me tea and whatever food he could find. He watched me drink the tea and eat, and then asked what happened. I said I couldn't tell him, but he said I had to tell him. So I said that I had a fight with my parents and they made me leave home. He didn't know what to say, but continued to talk with me about different topics, like about school and my friends, just to calm me down. But it was clear by my answers that I wasn't all right. As soon as the principal arrived, the guard took me to him and he continued to ask me questions. As I found out later, my parents would act normal when they would come into my school, and basically, they said that I had a learning disability and that was the reason I was so quiet. He was shocked to hear the truth. Next, I was taken to our school counselor and I talked with him for what seemed like hours. I was very hesitant to answer his questions at first, but I was slowly opening up and telling him my story bit by bit. He asked me to go home and act like everything was normal. I returned home and my parents acted like nothing happened. After a few days, people from Child Services came to my house and started their own investigation. My parents were mad. They were screaming and trying to intimidate the social workers. I had never seen so much anger from my parents. Usually it was just coldness. They ended up taking me away from my parents, and the same security guard that helped me took me into his house for a couple of days. He had a wife and 2 teenage boys that were older than me. They weren't rich or anything, but they were nice. I felt so uncomfortable that I was allowed to talk and, well, just be normal. I couldn't trust him back then because he didn't act like my parents. He, his wife, and his sons were so good to me. My parents tried to come to school and take me away, but, well, the security guard wouldn't let them. They desperately tried to get me back, but it wasn't because they missed me. It was because they didn't want to face repercussions for years of abusing me. After several months, maybe even close to a year, I was adopted by this family. I still remember how I stood with them in court, and I couldn't believe what was happening. I remember how all of us went to a pizza place to celebrate. I was so happy, but also at the same time, I didn't believe it. I asked them why they took me in. They smiled and said, "Because you're a good girl, Anne." And that was it. I still try to find James, and I hope he was as lucky as I was. But now, I'm just happy that I was surrounded by good people all along. And as soon as they found out about my problems, they helped without hesitation. Please, don't be silent if you are in a situation like mine. Find someone to tell. Try to find help. After all, adults are supposed to help us.
Hello, I'm Layla. When I tell anyone I've lived in a haunted house, the most common thing I would hear is, "Wow, cool." Well, guys, I am here to tell you why I wouldn't define the whole experience as cool after all. I have a friend, Sarah. We have been together since early childhood. We studied at school together, and after school we were accepted in the same university. Thing is, the university was in another city, and we had to move there before the term started. We didn't want to go to the dormitory, so we looked for a small apartment for the 2 of us. There was always something that wasn't okay with the apartments proposed to us, so we were becoming pretty desperate. Then suddenly, we came across a house, a 2-story old house nearly in the center of the city, but in a calm district. And what was even more attractive? At literally no price. It should have given us suspicions, but we were light-minded and never bothered. We didn't believe how lucky we were. When we were moving in, we were greeted by nice people, who were our neighbors. Just one of them smiling, looking a bit strange at us, and asked if there were any special reasons why we hadn't chosen that house. We laughed in a silly way and thought he was joking. Now I think we should have asked for explanations, but we couldn't wait to move in and just thanked him for the greetings. The entrance into the house was in a place where it was not visible from the main road. When we come up to the stairs, we see a nice old woman with a paper package in her hands. "Hello, girls. My name is Miss Hopkins. I want to welcome you to our neighborhood. I brought you my famous apple pie for lunch. I guess you are far from your parents and haven't started to cook yet." We thanked her cordially, and as we were opening the door, wanted to invite her for a coffee. But when we turned back to her, she was already gone. Well, we had a lot to do, and thought we would ask for her whereabouts from the neighbors later. So we were independent for the first time in our life. We were ecstatic. The only thing that was irritating us a bit was that we didn't manage to get a good sleep. But we decided it was an effect of the freshman stress. On the bright side, a couple of times a week we found at the doorstep a new package with a pie inside from Miss Hopkins. We never got the possibility to thank her though, as from the very first day we never came across her. We were becoming a bit too busy to think too much about Miss Hopkins though. Our sleep problems were becoming pretty overwhelming. It was quite often that I woke up in the middle of the night, all covered in cold sweat after a nightmare. Went to the kitchen to get myself a glass of water and found Sarah there with black circles under her eyes, looking close to tears. Sounds like a stupid problem, but try not to get a good night's sleep for a couple of months, and you wouldn't find it that stupid. What's worse, we thought we were starting to get hallucinations because of sleep deprivation. Sometimes one of us entered into an empty room and felt the scent of someone's perfume. We often felt cold drafts when all the windows were closed. Sarah admitted to having the same problem. It was getting really creepy. Once I was in the bathroom locked inside when I saw the handle slightly move, as if someone wanted to open the bathroom door. I yelled, "Sarah, it's occupied." And she shouted from downstairs, "What are you saying?" I felt goosebumps march across my body. If Sarah was there, who was trying to open the door? It took me half an hour to come out of the bathroom, with pure terror in my eyes. When I reached Sarah in her room and told it to her, she didn't even consider it would be a prank from my side. She also felt something was going on in that house. We decided that it was time to look for a new dwelling because we couldn't sleep there. And a lack of sleep added to our anxiety when we noticed those small things happening inside our house. That night, I had a horrible nightmare. I heard steps in the attic and went there to see who that was. We had a small ladder there. As I climbed the ladder, I saw a figure in the darkness. I switched on the light and saw Mrs. Hopkins, who was holding a pie in her hands, stretching it out to me and smiling weirdly without saying a word. I shouted and woke up all trembling. In that very moment, I heard the steps in the attic. Good Lord. I hid myself under the blanket and didn't take it off till dawn. In the morning, I took Sarah and went to our neighborhood, the one who greeted us with a strange question the first day, to get some answers. As we came to him, I asked him at once, "Where can we meet Miss Hopkins?" He looked at us with a strange expression and answered, "But there is no Miss Hopkins in the neighborhood. Why are you asking?" We were shocked. "But we met her the first day we came." "You must be mistaken. Miss Hopkins used to live in your house, but she had died several years ago after she had fallen terminally ill. She was famous for her baking, by the way." Absolutely speechless, we came out of his house and walked slowly towards ours. As we came up the stairs, we saw a paper package with another piece of Miss Hopkins' bakery. I was so stunned with horror that I hardly was able to make those couple of steps towards it. Above it, there was a handwritten note that said, "Girls, come to visit me sometime." What we did was at that point, we rushed into the house, packed our things in pure panic. It took us 3 minutes to pack everything we needed and never to come back anymore. That night, our friends from the dormitory managed to host us. We slept on plain mattresses on the floor, But I remember that night as one of the best in my life, when I finally got to sleep as a baby and didn't see any dreams at all. So guys, when you think that living in a haunted house is cool, I think twice. In real life, it is even more creepy than in horror films.